The air is cold. It smells of damp stone and centuries of incense. The light, filtering through the Gothic windows, doesn't illuminate, it interrogates, casting long shadows that dance across the stone floor polished by time. We are in a place of faith, of history, of reverent silence. This is not a prehistoric cave. This is Carlisle Cathedral, in the north of England, a stone bastion that has stood for nearly 900 years. And this is not a dungeon floor. It is the tomb of Richard Bell, a powerful bishop, a man of God and influence, who was buried here in the year 1496. His life and his faith are engraved in the iconography that surrounds him. But something else is engraved here, a memory, an eyewitness account of something that should not exist. And these creatures, embedded in his tomb for eternity, are not fantasy.
This piece was made more than 300 years before modern science even unearthed the first dinosaur bone. 300 years before the invention of the word dinosaur. The narrative we were taught insists this is impossible, a bizarre coincidence, a depiction of an exotic animal misinterpreted by a medieval artist. But look closely. The anatomy is not vague, not symbolic. It is specific. The question Oracle's Codex asks today is, what if the official history, with all its certainty, is lying? And what if Bishop Bell was not imagining, but remembering? You have just seen the centerpiece of our investigation, the body of the crime. Before we travel the world in search of more witnesses, I want you to be the jury. Comment below, coincidence or evidence? Your initial opinion is the first piece of our puzzle. If Bishop Bell's tomb were an isolated case, we could, with effort, dismiss it as an anomaly. An artist who perhaps saw a partial fossil and reconstructed it with imagination. But context matters. The bishop was buried in one of England's most important cathedrals, a place of historical record, not fairy tales. The other engravings on his tomb depict known animals of the time: a dog, a pig, a fish, a bird, all represented in the same realistic style. Why, among these factual representations, would the artist insert two fantastical creatures with such peculiar and consistent anatomy? The official explanation is that they could be eels or snakes. But eels don't have legs, and snakes don't have the bulky body and giraffe-like neck depicted here. The explanation simply doesn't hold up under scrutiny. No, Bishop Bell's tomb is not an anomaly. It is the first loose thread that, when pulled, threatens to unravel the entire tapestry of history as we know it. It is proof that humanity and the great reptiles shared this planet, and our ancestors from every culture, on every continent, recorded these encounters. They just used a different word for them, a word that today has been turned into a synonym for fantasy: dragon. And although the form of this dragon varied from culture to culture, from the winged wyvern of Europe to the divine serpent of China, the essence of a great and powerful reptile was a universal thread, a collective memory of something frighteningly real. Our inquiry now takes us to Mesopotamia, ancient Babylon, 600 years before Christ. This is the civilization that gave us astronomy, law, writing. They were meticulous observers of the natural world. And on the monumental Ishtar Gate, the entrance to the heart of the world's greatest city, King Nebuchadnezzar II ordered the immortalization of the animals that symbolized his power and that of his gods. In perfect rows of glazed bricks, we see lions, symbols of the goddess Ishtar, depicted with reverent anatomical precision. We see wild bulls, or aurochs, symbols of the god Adad. These are animals the artist knew. And alongside them, with the same dignity and realism, is a third creature. The Babylonians called it the Sirrush.
Look at it. A body covered in scales, a long serpentine neck, the head of a snake, with a horn and a forked tongue. The hind legs are those of an eagle, with powerful talons, and the front legs, unmistakably, those of a feline. For centuries, academics have called it mythical, a fantastical hybrid. But why would the Babylonians, masters of symbolism, place a real animal, the lion, next to another real animal, the bull, and then suddenly insert a fantasy? The logic of the composition suggests that, to them, the Sirrush was as real as the others. It was the sacred animal of Babylon's chief god, Marduk. Were they depicting a myth, or a rare and feared animal from their menagerie? Perhaps a survivor from a past era, kept in the king's gardens? Cross the ocean to Mexico, 1944. In a Cambaro, a German merchant named Waldemar Julsrud discovers an unbelievable collection of clay figurines, thousands of them. Over the years, more than 33,000 artifacts are unearthed. They represent many things, but what shocks the world is that a large percentage shows humans hunting, fighting, and even domesticating creatures that look, unmistakably, like dozens of species of dinosaurs. Iguanodons, Triceratops, Stegosaurus, Tyrannosaurs. Thermoluminescence dating, performed in labs in the 70s, pointed to an age of about 4,500 years, or 2500 BC. Official archaeology, unable to fit this into its timeline, dismisses it as an elaborate hoax. The theory is that local peasants manufactured them to sell to Julsrud. But how would Mexican peasants in the 1940s, long before the internet and the popularization of dinosaurs by pop culture, have such precise and varied paleontological knowledge to create over 30,000 different figures, many depicting species that would only be discovered decades later? The scale of the supposed hoax defies logic. Fly south to Peru. The Inca stones. Thousands of andesite stones, a type of volcanic rock, engraved with complex scenes. And what did they show? The same impossible story. Humans interacting with dinosaurs. Men performing complex surgeries, using telescopes, riding flying creatures that look like pterodactyls. Another hoax for the official history. It is crucial to note that both Acámbaro and Ica are flashpoints of immense controversy, and we could debate their authenticity for hours. But for our investigation, let's temporarily set them aside. Because even if we completely ignore Mexico and Peru, the global pattern that emerges from Europe, Babylon, and China remains unchanged and demands an explanation. The thread of our investigation is woven through cultures and centuries. In ancient Rome, a 2nd century mosaic found in Praimeste depicts life along the Nile. It shows crocodiles, hippos, and in one scene, a group of hunters confronting a long-necked, gray, hairless creature that resembles a dinosaur. Roman artists were known for their realism. What were they depicting? In France, the famous Bayeux Tapestry, which chronicles the Norman conquest of England in 1066, shows comets in the sky. And in its decorative borders, there are a series of animals, including creatures that resemble dinosaurs. China, whose zodiac is composed of 11 real animals and a dragon.
The Greek historian Herodotus and the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder described in their natural history books winged serpents in Egypt and Arabia. Marco Polo, on his travels in the 13th century, reported seeing giant lizards in the Chinese province of Karajan, which the local population hunted for their meat and bile. In European literature, the Anglo-Saxon epic of Beowulf describes his fight not only with the monster Grendel, but also with a worm, a fire-breathing dragon that guarded a treasure hoard. The Norse sagas are filled with encounters with giant sea serpents, like the Jormungandr. From legends to sacred texts, from Babylonian art to Peruvian pottery, the planet is covered with the footprints of these creatures. To dismiss each of these instances as a coincidence or an isolated myth becomes in itself an act of blind faith.
The evidence is on every continent, in every culture. Humanity was clearly seeing something large, reptilian, and often dangerous. But how could they all have seen dinosaurs if they died out 65 million years ago? The answer, the key that connects all of this, is not a fossil. It is a word, a single word invented in 1841 that changed everything. If you feel that we are about to open a door to a new version of history, subscribe now, because you will not want to miss the revelation. To understand the impact of the revelation to come, we must first travel back in time, to a world before 1841, a world without the word dinosaur. How did our ancestors see the animal kingdom? For them, the world was a far more mysterious and integrated place. There was no hard line separating the known from the unknown. Medieval bestiaries, Europe's first natural history books, listed dragons, griffins, and unicorns alongside lions, elephants, and bears. There was no mythology section. They were all considered God's creatures, part of the great tapestry of life. Some were common, others were rare and lived in distant, dangerous lands. But all were considered real. The existence of a dragon was no more fantastic than that of a giraffe to an English peasant who had seen neither. "Here be dragons" on old maps was not a warning of fantasy. It was a warning of real danger for an unexplored area where fearsome creatures might live. The world was bigger, stranger, and far less sanitized. Before 1841, the word for a great and terrible reptile was dragon. It was a biological category, just like bird or fish. In 1841, the brilliant and notoriously ambitious British anatomist Sir Richard Owen, a man determined to organize and categorize the natural world under his own rules and to solidify his legacy against rivals like Darwin, while examining the bones of three large fossilized reptiles, Megalosaurus, Iguanodon, and Hylaeosaurus, he coined a new term to group them. He took the Greek words dinos, terrible, and saurus, lizard, and thus the word dinosaur was born. Owen was a titan of anatomy, but also a man of colossal ego. In a London shaken by Charles Darwin's new and dangerous ideas about evolution, Owen saw the need for a counter-narrative, a story of life on Earth that was grand, orderly, and which he, not Darwin, would control. The creation of Dinosauria was not just an act of classification, it was an act of power. It was the construction of a new pantheon with Owen as its sole priest. And with this single act of scientific baptism, human history was fractured. Everything that came before 1841, every legend, every engraving, every ancient text, every eyewitness account of an encounter with a dragon, was instantly divorced from the new scientific reality. The dragons were retroactively transformed into fantasy, into mythology, into allegories.
And the dinosaurs were locked away in an impossibly distant past, 65 million years away, safe behind an impenetrable wall of time. The invention of the dinosaur was not just a discovery. It was, perhaps, the greatest and most successful act of historical editing ever performed. But why? Why erase the dragon? Why orchestrate this global historical amnesia? The answer is complex, but we can speculate on some powerful motives. First, the rise of uniformitarianism in geology and Darwinian evolution in biology. These theories, which became the dogma of Victorian science, required vast, uninterrupted eons of time. A world where humans and great reptiles coexisted was a much more complex, unpredictable world that challenged this narrative of a slow, linear, orderly progression. The presence of dragons in historical times was an inconvenient anomaly that needed to be eliminated for the new scientific model to work without contradiction. They did not just rewrite history, they diminished our past. They sterilized it, made it safe, distant, and above all, irrelevant. The history that was stolen from us is not just a tale of monsters, it is a story about our own potential to perceive, record, and perhaps even understand a world far stranger than our modern science allows us to admit. The evidence has been presented, but the investigation is far from over. The Carlisle Cathedral is still there. The Ishtar Gate is still on display. The clues are all around us, waiting for new eyes. What legend or myth from your own culture have you always suspected was an echo of a lost truth? A lake monster, a giant serpent, a creature that shouldn't exist? Share it in the comments. Every story is a clue for our next chapter. Subscribe to become a decoder of our Codex. Together, let's challenge the amnesia and recover the history that was stolen from us. Keep questioning.